Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Welcome to this deep dive. I want you to imagine, just for a second, holding an X-ray of your own soul.
Oh, wow. That's a heavy image to start with.
Right. I mean, think about it. If you break a bone, the physical reality is totally binary. You look at the X-ray, you see a bright, jagged white line across the bone, and the doctor just points to it.
Yeah, it's objective. You apply a cast and you're good.
Exactly. It's comforting, Because the pathology is visible, it's easy to categorize, and everyone knows the protocol to fix it.
Right. The physical world allows for that kind of diagnostic clarity. When a disease is localized to tissue or bone, the parameters of health and sickness are highly observable.
But, and here is where we get to the core of today's mission, the moment we step away from the physical skeleton and wade into the world of the spiritual heart, that X-ray machine just shatters.
It really does. You're no longer looking at high contrast images. You're navigating the absolute murkiest diagnostic waters imaginable.
Because when we analyze the diseases of the spiritual heart, the symptoms don't show up as a fever or a cough, right?
Exactly. The pathology is behavioral. It's psychological. And honestly, it's often completely invisible to anyone just casually observing you.
It hides behind a veneer of perfect health.
It does, which is terrifying.
It is, and that sets the parameters for what we're doing today. We're taking a really comprehensive stack of sources, classical encyclopedias of Islamic jurisprudence, deep philological analyses of Arabic roots, tafsir, the hadith corpus, and even modern psychological models.
That's a massive stack.
Yeah, we are pulling from everywhere to unpack the most dangerous, insidious spiritual disease known to our tradition. We are dissecting Nifaq. Hypocrisy.
And we really need to clarify, we are doing this not to arm you, the listener, with a magnifying glass to go scrutinize your neighbors.
Oh, definitely not.
Right. We are handing you a mirror for radical, uncompromising self-assessment. That framing is imperative.
Yeah, because the classical scholars, they always approached the study of Nifaq with a sense of profound internal dread.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This disease operates on a multi-tiered axis. It infects your theology, it destabilizes sociology, and it completely rewires your individual psychology. So studying it is basically a defensive maneuver for the soul.
Okay, so to build an advanced understanding of this, we can't just jump straight into the theological symptoms.
No, you have to start at the foundation.
Right, we have to strip the concept down to its absolute linguistic bedrock because, the Arabic language isn't just a method of communication, it's a highly descriptive visual mapping of reality.
It really is. It paints a picture.
So if we look at the triliteral root of the word nifaq, the letters nun, fa, and qaf, NFQ, we find something wild. Pre-Islamic Arabs didn't use this root to describe human morality at all.
Not even a little bit. The Bedouin usage of NFQ was entirely zoological.
Which is crazy to think about. They were describing animal architecture, right?
Yes, specifically the desert survival mechanisms of a small rodent called the jerboa.
Okay, let's unpack this. We are talking about a desert mouse.
Essentially, yes.
So how does the living space of a literal rodent map onto the most destructive spiritual disease in Islam? Like, what is the architectural layout of this burrow?
Well, you have to remember, the desert is a completely hostile ecosystem. It's swarming with predators, vipers,
Right.
hawks.
Nowhere to hide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to survive, the jerboa doesn't just dig a simple tunnel into the sand. It engineers a complex dual pathway system.
Okay.
The word nafaqa referred to this specific burrow. It digs one highly visible, wide entrance on the surface. This is the public door.
So everyone can see it.
Right. But beneath the ground, it excavates a secondary tunnel leading upward, and it stops just a few millimeters short of breaking the surface tension of the sand.
Wow.
Yeah, this hidden, fragile ceiling is the nafaqa.
An emergency escape hatch.
Precisely. If a snake enters the main visible entrance, the jerboa simply rams its head through that paper-thin layer of sand at the secret exit and vanishes.
It enters the Republic Declaration, and it escapes through a concealed reality. That is, wow.
It's brilliant. And when the Quranic revelation descended, it performed this masterful semantic leap. It took this specific visual understanding of animal architecture and mapped it onto human theology.
So the Quran takes a physical hole in the ground and elevates it into a metaphor for a fractured soul.
Exactly. The munafiq, the hypocrite, enters the faith through the highly visible public entrance.
They say the shahada.
Right. They pronounce the testimonies of faith, they pray in the congregation, they adopt the cultural aesthetics of the community.
They look the part.
Fully. But internally, they have preemptively engineered an exit strategy, At the very first sign of social pressure or financial loss or, when they are entirely alone, they retreat through that hidden door of disbelief.
And the really critical element here, the thing that sticks out to me, is the premeditation.
Yes,
That
exactly.
the jerboa doesn't dig the escape hatch after the snake comes in.
No, the burrow is designed with the exit from day one.
Right, so similarly, the pure hypocrite's engagement with the faith is structurally compromised from the very beginning. They never let themselves be fully enveloped by the moral constraints of Islam because they always maintain that covert avenue of retreat.
It's a calculated performance.
It really makes me think of a massive Hollywood studio lot.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
You know what I mean? You walk down the Central Avenue and you see a bank, a cafe, a beautiful suburban home. The facade is immaculate.
Right, the paint is fresh.
Exactly. The windows reflect the sun. It looks like a completely functioning society. But the moment you change your angle and walk behind the storefront, the illusion collapses.
Because there's nothing there.
Nothing. Just cheap wooden struts propping up a sheet of painted plywood. The presentation is entirely curated for the spectator.
The structural integrity is zero. And that lack of structural integrity is precisely what makes the edifice so dangerous to anyone leaning against it.
Because if you lean on it, it falls.
Right. If the community relies on that facade, assuming it's a load-bearing wall, the entire structure of mutual trust collapses.
Which introduces the reality that, not all facades are built the same. And our sources are very explicit about dividing Nifaq into two distinct categories.
Yes, you have major and minor.
Let's look at the first category, Nifaq al-Akbar, major hypocrisy, or Nifaq itiqadi. With this one, we are dealing with a total cognitive and spiritual void behind the plywood.
Yeah, Nifaq itiqadi literally translates to hypocrisy in core conviction. This is the absolute concealment of kufr, of disbelief.
So they don't believe any of it.
Internally, zero belief. They reject the Creator, the revelation, the angels, the day of judgment, everything. Yet they consciously and strategically present themselves as believing members of the Ummah.
It is a 100% conscious performance. But if we analyze the eschatological consequences, like the reality of the hereafter described in the Quran, it gets really intense.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, the text in Surah An-Nisa states that the hypocrites will occupy al-darak al-asfal min al-nar, the absolute lowest, most severe depths of the hellfire.
The architecture of the hellfire places the hypocrite beneath the open rejecter of faith.
And this is the theological knot I really want us to untangle here. Because if an individual is committing open shirk, right? If they are physically prostrating to an idol of stone, actively fighting the believers, verbally cursing the prophets.
Right, their rejection is absolute and public.
Exactly. Yet the person who outwardly prays in the congregation but harbors disbelief in their heart is placed in a lower depth of punishment than that open idol worshiper.
It seems counterintuitive at first.
It really does. What is the mechanism of divine justice that penalizes the internal saboteur more heavily than the open combatant?
Well, the underlying logic lies in the nature of the harm inflicted upon the social and spiritual ecosystem. Think about it. An open adversary operates with transparency.
Right.
When an enemy stands on the periphery of your community and declares hostility, they represent a known variable.
You can see them coming.
Exactly. And a known variable can be planned for. You can fortify your defenses, protect your family, engage in clear diplomacy. The rules of engagement are established.
The threat is highly visible on the radar. I mean, you don't invite the commander of the opposing army into your home to watch your kid.
Precisely. But the munafiq, the hypocrite, operates as an undetected internal hemorrhage. By adopting the camouflage of brotherhood, they bypass all your external defense mechanisms.
We just walk right through the front door.
They gain access to the inner sanctum of the community. They are entrusted with state secrets, they manage community funds, they marry into families, they influence the youth.
Man, that's heavy.
They weaponize the sacred trust of the Ummah to dismantle it from the inside out.
It's the ultimate asymmetry of warfare. The open enemy attacks the walls, but the hypocrite poisons the well in the center of the city.
That's exactly it. The damage is exponentially higher because the community is in a state of relaxed vulnerability around them. Treason is fundamentally more destructive than opposition.
Because treason exploits trust. And trust is the gravitational force that holds a society together.
So that severe penalty in the hereafter, the lowest depth of hell, it's a direct reflection of the catastrophic damage caused by weaponizing the sacred bonds of faith.
Okay, so that establishes the devastating reality of major hypocrisy. But the sources spend a massive amount of time dissecting the second category, Nifaq al-Asghar.
Minor hypocrisy. Or Nifaq amali, hypocrisy in action.
This is where the diagnostic mirror turns sharply toward the everyday believer, right?
Yes. Minor hypocrisy describes an individual whose core theology is actually intact. They genuinely believe in the divine, the messenger, and the last day.
Okay.
However, their behavioral outputs, their daily habits, and their social interactions perfectly mimic the operational tactics of the pure hypocrite.
So if I'm playing devil's advocate here for a listener who's analyzing their own life right now,
Sure, go ahead.
if Nifaq al doesn't technically excommunicate a person from the faith, if their core belief is still technically Muslim, is a behavioral lapse really a spiritual crisis? Ah, I see what you're saying.
Like, if I habitually flake on helping my friend move, or if I just constantly spin little white lies at the office to avoid uncomfortable conversations, I'm not plotting the downfall of the Ummah.
Right.
So why do the classical scholars treat these minor social infractions with such existential panic?
Because the panic is rooted in an understanding of human neurobiology and spiritual decay. The scholars deeply understood the concept of wasila.
The conduit, right, the stepping stone.
Yes, minor hypocrisy is never a static condition. It is an active, aggressive pathogen. You simply cannot compartmentalize a behavioral habit from your cognitive reality indefinitely.
You're talking about the mechanics of cognitive dissonance.
Exactly.
If my belief system says truth is paramount, but my daily action is lying's convenient, those two realities can't just peacefully coexist in the brain without massive friction.
Yeah, and the human psyche will always seek to eliminate that friction. When you continuously engage in deceptive behavior, when you lie, break trusts, manipulate realities for short-term gain, you place a spiritual callus over the heart. It's a callus, yeah.
Each infraction desensitizes the soul to the weight of the sin. If it's left untreated by rigorous repentance, the behavioral rot begins to seep into the cognitive foundation.
It's a spiritual erosion. The action slowly rewires the belief.
Yes. You start by faking your excuses to your employer to avoid getting in trouble. Then you fake your financial status to your peers to maintain an image.
And it just escalates?
Eventually, the reflex of deception becomes so deeply ingrained in your neural pathways that you attempt to fake your devotion to your creator. The mask calcifies.
Wow.
So the minor hypocrisy serves as the gateway drug, dragging the intact belief system down into the abyss of major hypocrisy.
That completely reframes the entire discussion. A white lie isn't just a social faux pas, it is a microfracture in the foundation of faith.
It really is.
So if this is the mechanism of decay, we need to transition into the exact symptomatology. How does this pathogen physically manifest in a person's life?
Well, the Hadith literature provides a highly detailed diagnostic rubric. Specifically, there's a famous narration from Abdullah ibn Ubayy detailing the 4 behavioral traits of the hypocrite.
The Prophet established a very clear metric here. He stated that whoever possesses these 4 characteristics is a pure hypocrite, and whoever possesses one of them possesses a trait of hypocrisy until they abandon it.
Let's break down that first symptom, the distortion of reality. The text says when he speaks, he lies.
Right. Truthfulness, Sidcree, it isn't merely a moral recommendation in our tradition, it's the fundamental axis upon which reality operates.
Exactly. The divine is described as the ultimate truth. So when an individual engages in chronic, systematic lying, they are engaging in an act of profound arrogance.
They're attempting to rewrite reality to suit their immediate convenience.
Yes, it's a total rejection of accountability. If the truth makes me look incompetent, or if it costs me money, I just fabricate a new timeline of events where I'm the hero. Or the victim.
And over time, like you mentioned with the callus, the reflex becomes so instantaneous that people will lie about entirely inconsequential things, just to maintain the habit of controlling the narrative.
And once reality is fluid, the social contract disintegrates, which leads directly to the second symptom. When he makes a promise, he breaks it.
Right, because if your relationship with the past and present is built on lies, your commitments to the future are inherently worthless.
Exactly.
But, breaking a promise is often written off in modern culture as just mere flakiness, like, oh, I got busy or I forgot. How does the spiritual framework view the broken promise?
A promise is the collateral of your personal honor. When you give your word to another human being, you are essentially leveraging your integrity as a guarantee.
So it's heavy.
It's extremely heavy. To break that promise without a legitimate, severe external constraint is to declare that your word has zero market value.
Wow.
It demonstrates a profound arrogance because it says, my immediate comfort is infinitely more valuable than your time, your expectations, and my own dignity.
You are bankrupting your own social capital. And that concept of capital brings us to the third symptom, which really expands the scope from a verbal promise to tangible realities. When he is entrusted, he betrays.
Oh, yes. This revolves around the heavy concept of amana.
Trust.
Yes. Amana encompasses the entire spectrum of human trust. It's the physical wealth someone asks you to hold. It's the professional position you are hired to execute. It's the vulnerability a spouse places in your hands.
And very crucially, it's the private information, the secret that a brother or sister confides in you.
If we look at the macro scale, trust is the invisible currency of every functioning civilization.
Think about it. If I deposit a check at the bank, I am operating on amana. If I drive through a green light at an intersection, I am trusting the oncoming traffic to honor the red light.
Right. The entire system relies on an unspoken agreement that people will uphold their entrusted duties.
So when the hypocrite betrays the amana, they are basically introducing a virus of paranoia into the ecosystem.
Exactly. If a community discovers that their financial officers are embezzling or their spiritual leaders are betraying confidences, the communal fabric just tears. People stop donating. They stop seeking counsel.
They retreat into isolation.
Yes. The hypocrite fractures the unity of the ummah by proving that vulnerability is dangerous.
And that isolation is the perfect breeding ground for the final and arguably most violent behavioral symptom on this list. The text states, when he disputes, he acts wickedly.
The Arabic term utilized here is fajara.
I want to spend significant time analyzing fajara because it is a profoundly observable, terrifying psychological phenomenon in modern relationships.
It really is. Fajara translates to an explosion, a violent bursting forth of immorality.
An explosion.
Yes, in the context of a dispute, it describes an individual who completely discards all parameters of decency, justice, and proportionality the millisecond they are challenged or angered.
If we map this onto a real-world scenario, it's the phenomenon of the scorched earth argument.
Yes, the nuclear option.
Let's look at a close friendship. Two individuals share their lives, their insecurities, their family trauma. They build a deep reservoir of shared vulnerability.
Right.
Then a point of friction occurs. A business deal goes slightly sour, or there is a perceived slight. Now, a person grounded in faith might be angry, but they maintain boundaries. The individual afflicted with fajara, however, goes absolutely nuclear.
They do not seek to resolve the dispute. They seek to annihilate the opponent.
Annihilate. The transition is whiplash-inducing. The quiet, supportive friend instantly transforms into a vicious adversary. They deploy the most profane, degrading vocabulary.
And the true manifestation of fajara is the weaponization of the amana we just discussed.
Yes.
They will take every private insecurity, every family secret that was entrusted to them during times of peace, and broadcast it to the public to inflict maximum psychological damage.
That specific behavioral output is a massive diagnostic indicator. It reveals the underlying architecture of their psyche.
Because the explosion of fajara proves that their prior kindness, their patience, and their loyalty were never rooted in principle.
It was entirely conditional.
Exactly. It was a performance maintained only as long as it yielded personal benefit. The moment the relationship required compromise or generated friction, the mask was discarded and the foundational toxicity of the ego erupted.
It reveals that they viewed the friendship not as a bond, but almost like a hostage situation, where they were quietly gathering collateral to use against you.
It is a terrifying realization.
A true believer might be furious, they might pursue justice or demand their rights, but their anger is restrained by the fear of divine accountability.
The hypocrite has no such restraint because, as we established, they have no internal foundation.
Right. If you, the listener, identify a pattern of fajara within your own conflict resolution style, if your immediate instinct during an argument is to destroy the other person's reputation, you must recognize this as an aggressive metastasis of nifaq in your heart.
Yeah, it's a huge red flag.
So these four symptoms, lying, breaking promises, betraying trust, and exploding in anger, they map out the social devastation of the disease. It's how the hypocrite navigates the horizontal axis of human relationships.
But our source material transitions from the horizontal to the vertical. It details the highly specific hidden signs of how this pathology infects a person's private worship and their relationship with the divine.
Right. The classical scholars extrapolate from the Quran and Hadith to provide a list of spiritual symptoms that are deeply intertwined with the psychology of performance.
When I reviewed the stack, the list of devotional symptoms was stark.
What were they?
Extreme laziness during the dur, the midday prayer. Remembering the divine only fleetingly. A complete refusal to engage in istighfar, seeking forgiveness out of sheer ego. a tight-fisted stinginess regarding charity,
Okay.
and the absolute heaviest burden for them, attending the Fajr or Isha prayers in congregation.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Why specifically Fajr at dawn and Isha at night? Like, why are those the heaviest for the hypocrite?
To extract the mechanism behind these specific symptoms, we have to analyze the core motivation of the hypocrite's worship. The animating force behind their devotion is Riya.
Showing off.
Yes, the intense desire to be seen, validated, and praised by the community. Their religion is entirely transactional.
The worship is a commodity they exchange for social capital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, consider the socioeconomic and technological reality of Medina in the 7th century. There is no artificial lighting.
Right, no streetlights.
The streets and the mosque are illuminated strictly by the sun. During Duhr and Asr in the afternoon, the daylight is brilliant. If an individual walks to the mosque, the entire neighborhood observes their piety.
The performance has an audience, so the transaction is profitable.
Yes, but they execute it with laziness, as the Quran notes, because the physical act itself holds no intrinsic spiritual value to them. It is merely a chore required to maintain their cover.
That makes the focus on Fajr and Isha mathematically logical for them. I mean, during the pre-dawn darkness of Fajr or the deep night of Isha, the streets are pitch black.
The mosque is shadowed.
If you stand in the back row, literally no one can identify you.
The audience is eliminated. And if there is no audience, the return on investment for the performance is zero.
Wow.
The hypocrite's internal calculus determines that the physical exertion of leaving a warm bed is a net loss if it does not generate communal praise.
So the immense heaviness they feel towards Fajr and Isha is the definitive proof that their devotion was never directed toward the heavens.
It was always tethered to the eyes of the crowd.
That concept of the return on investment perfectly explains the symptom of extreme stinginess, too. The notes contrast their charitable giving with their personal expenditure, and the dichotomy is jarring.
The financial outputs of an individual are a flawless ledger of their true internal priorities.
The hypocrite will effortlessly liquidate thousands of dollars for a luxury vacation, a high-end vehicle, or premium aesthetic upgrades to their home.
Because those expenditures purchase immediate, tangible status.
Right. They yield high-definition photos for public admiration. It feeds the ego directly. But if a community leader requests $50 to repair the mosque roof or to sponsor an orphan, their fist clenches shut. They suddenly become highly analytical about, budgetary constraints.
Because anonymous charity, or charity directed toward the marginalized, yields zero social prestige in the circles they value.
Yeah.
It requires a genuine belief that the divine sees the hidden transaction and will multiply it in the hereafter. Since the hypocrite lacks that core theological conviction, giving away capital with no earthly return feels like setting money on fire.
It is entirely coherent when viewed through the lens of pure materialism. But there's another symptom here that transcends laziness or stinginess and moves into active verbal subversion.
Yes, the sources highlight the terrifying reality of mocking the religion.
The casual ridicule of the sacred. This feels incredibly dangerous today, perhaps more than ever due to the nature of social media and constant broadcasting.
It really is.
We see individuals who identify as believers making sarcastic, degrading jokes about Quranic verses, mocking the prophetic traditions, or ridiculing the physical appearance and practices of devout Muslims.
And the universal defense mechanism when they're confronted is always the same.
It's just banter.
Exactly. I was just joking. Don't take it too seriously. We were just passing the time.
But the Quranic response to this defense is devastatingly absolute. During the expedition of Tabuk, certain hypocrites were marching with the Muslim army. To pass the time, they began mocking the companions who were known for reciting the Quran, calling them gluttonous and cowardly in battle.
Just casual campfire mockery.
Yes. But the revelation that descended in Surah Al-Kaaba stripped away the facade of humor. The verses address them directly. Say, "Is it Allah and His verses and His messenger that you are mocking? Make no excuse. You have disbelieved after your belief."
That is a chilling paradigm shift. You can literally joke your way out of the fold of Islam.
The divine text does not accept irony as a defense for blasphemy.
Because the act of mocking the sacred is not merely a lapse in etiquette. It is the ultimate manifestation of arrogance. To make a joke out of divine revelation, the ego must first place itself above the revelation.
You have to think you're bigger than it.
Right. The individual is attempting to shrink the majesty of the divine down to a microscopic size that they can ridicule and manage. It proves that the heart is completely devoid of taqwa, of reverence and awe. A heart that trembles before the Creator cannot simultaneously laugh at his commands.
So to see all of these symptoms, the lies, the treason, the calculated worship, the mockery synthesized into a single human life, we have to transition to the macro scale. Theoretical symptoms only take us so far.
We need to study the pathology in vivo.
Exactly. And the Sirah, the prophetic biography, provides us with the ultimate tragic masterclass in the person of Abdullah ibn Ubayy ibn Salul.
The undisputed architect of hypocrisy in early Islamic history.
To understand the sheer scale of his deceit, we have to look at the geopolitical landscape of the city of Yathrib, which would become Medina right before the Prophet's migration.
Yathrib was an ecosystem defined by generational trauma. The two dominant Arab tribes, the Ayaz and the Khazraj, had been locked in a cycle of brutal, fratricidal warfare for decades.
Constant bloodshed.
Yes. The most recent conflict, the Battle of Bu'ath, had decimated their leadership and exhausted both populations.
They were bleeding out, and they realized that without centralized leadership, the city would collapse entirely.
Exactly. So in a rare moment of consensus, the tribes agreed to unify under a single monarch. The man they selected for this unprecedented elevation was Abdullah ibn Ubayy, a senior chieftain of the Khazraj.
The jewelers of Medina were literally in the process of forging his crown.
He is standing at the absolute apex of his life's ambition. Decades of political maneuvering are about to culminate in absolute royalty.
But before the crown touches his head, the geopolitical tectonic plates shift. The Prophet Muhammad arrives in Medina.
The arrival of the Prophet fundamentally rewrites the power dynamics of the city. The fractured tribes find a superior unifying force in the message of Islam.
They voluntarily submit to the Prophet, recognizing him not merely as a spiritual guide, but as the supreme political and judicial authority.
In the blink of an eye, Ibn Ubayy's kingdom evaporates. He goes from the impending monarch to just another citizen in a new Islamic state.
The psychological devastation of that loss must have been absolute.
His pathology is entirely rooted in this shattered ego, in class resentment, and a monstrous jealousy. But Ibn Ubayy was a highly intelligent political pragmatist.
He knew how to play the game.
Yes, he looked at the overwhelming wave of conversions sweeping through Medina and realized that open, armed resistance against the Prophet would result in his immediate political isolation and likely his death.
So instead of fighting the wave, he decides to swim inside it to drown the captain.
What a way to put it. He executes the ultimate pivot. He publicly pronounces the Shahada. He formally professes Islam. By doing so, he secures his wealth, maintains his high social standing among the Khazraj, and guarantees his physical safety.
And he utilizes that safety to dedicate the rest of his life to a covert, exhaustive campaign of internal sabotage.
But despite his intelligence, his arrogance was so massive that it frequently leaked through the facade. The incident with the donkey perfectly captures the visceral disgust he harbored.
Oh man, yeah. The Prophet was riding a donkey to visit a gathering where Ibn Ubayy was sitting. As the animal approached, it kicked up some dust from the unpaved road.
And what does Ibn Ubayy do? Sitting among his tribal elite, he immediately covers his nose with his cloak and loudly commands the Prophet to keep his smelly donkey away from them.
It's a deliberate, public attempt to humiliate the messenger of the divine. He is testing the boundaries of his influence, trying to signal to his followers that he still views himself as vastly superior to this new leadership.
And it instantly ignited the latent tribal tensions. A sincere Muslim companion retorted that the dust of the Prophet's donkey was better than Ibn Ubayy's perfume.
Weapons were drawn, and a brawl broke out in the gathering. Ibn Ubayy's mere presence acted as an accelerant for civil discord.
But his subversion was not limited to petty insults. He scaled his operations to military treason, resulting in a massive body count.
The Battle of Uhud stands as the prime historical example of the existential threat posed by Nifaq.
The Meccan Quraysh were marching on Medina with a heavily armed force of 3,000 soldiers.
Right.
The Prophet mobilized the Muslim Defense Force, which consisted of roughly 1,000 men. Ibn Ubayy, maintaining his disguise as a loyal commander, marched out with the army at the head of a contingent of 300 men.
30% of the entire defensive force is under the command of the enemy within.
As the two armies closed the distance, in the incredibly tense moments just before the vanguard engaged, Ibn Ubayy executed his masterstroke of psychological and military warfare.
What did you do?
He utilized a minor strategic disagreement, claiming the Prophet ignored his tactical advice to fight from within the city as a pretext to unilaterally withdraw his entire contingent. He ordered his 300 men to turn their backs on the battlefield and march home to Medina.
The mechanics of this betrayal are staggering. He didn't refuse to mobilize. He mobilized specifically to maximize the devastating optics of a last-minute desertion. I mean, imagine standing in the Muslim ranks, facing an enemy that outnumbers you 3-1, and suddenly, one-third of your own brothers drop their weapons and walk away.
The psychological shockwaves, the sudden vacuum in the defensive line, it directly contributed to the heavy casualties the Muslims suffered that day.
He leveraged his fake faith to acquire a load-bearing position in the military structure, only to intentionally collapse the structure at the moment of maximum vulnerability.
And his campaign continued into economic warfare. During the expedition of Banu al-Mustalik, a minor altercation occurred over a water well between the native Medinans, the Ansar, and the migrants from Mecca, the Muhajirun.
Right, just a normal point of friction.
But Ibn Ubayy seized the friction and attempted to incite a full-scale civil war. He instructed his wealthy supporters, do not spend on those with the messenger of Allah until they disperse.
He was advocating for a coordinated economic blockade to starve the poorer migrants out of the city.
And he coupled the economic threat with a seditious boast. He declared, if we return to Medina, the more honored will surely expel the more abased. He was openly referring to himself and his tribal elite as the honored, and classifying the prophet and the believers as the abased who needed to be violently deported.
This brings me to the major legal and theological pushback, because if we analyze the data here, military desertion leading to mass casualties, coordinating an economic blockade, openly inciting civil war and deportation.
The evidence of treason is astronomical.
Exactly. Umar ibn al-Khattab famously drew his sword and begged the Prophet for permission to execute Ibn Ubayy. Even Ibn Ubayy's own son, who was a deeply sincere and devout Muslim, approached the Prophet and offered to carry out the execution himself to prevent a tribal blood feud.
Right.
So why did the Prophet refuse? Why was the architect of this misery allowed to live and operate freely in Medina until his natural death?
The Prophet's restraint here is a profound demonstration of advanced statecraft and the strict parameters of Islamic jurisprudence. On a purely legal level, an Islamic court adjudicates strictly based on explicit material evidence. The internal state of the heart is the exclusive jurisdiction of the divine.
Right.
Despite his massive orchestration of chaos, Ibn Ubayy was a master of plausible deniability. He never stood in the center of the mosque and explicitly declared, I disbelieve in Allah and his messenger. He always shrouded his treason in political critiques or strategic disagreements.
So legally, there was no unequivocal smoking gun of apostasy. He kept the mask duct taped to his face.
Precisely. But beyond the courtroom, there was a macro-political reality. The Prophet was constructing a nascent civilization surrounded by hostile Arab tribes, observing Medina's every move. When Umar requested the execution, the Prophet offered a masterclass in optics. He replied, lest the people should say that Muhammad used to kill his companions.
That sentence is incredibly heavy, lest the people say.
Think about the information flow in the 7th century desert. The surrounding Bedouin tribes didn't understand the complex theological nuances of Nifaq. They didn't know the intimate details of Ibn Ubayy's internal sabotage.
They would just see the headline.
Exactly. All they would hear is the headline. Muhammad executed his highest-ranking general and the chief of the Khazraj. It would instantly validate every piece of propaganda the Meccans were broadcasting.
It would permanently deter any other tribe from entering into alliances or embracing Islam out of fear that the Prophet was a tyrannical dictator purging his own ranks.
Furthermore, Ibn Ubayy still commanded deep, irrational tribal loyalty from segments of the Khazraj. If the Prophet executed him, it wouldn't just be an execution. It would ignite the exact civil war Ibn Ubayy had been trying to start.
The Prophet absorbed the immense daily friction and danger of Ibn Ubayy's existence in order to protect the long-term survival, unity, and global image of the Ummah. He neutralized the threat through immense patience rather than the sword.
It's a profound lesson in leadership.
Now, analyzing Ibn Ubayy's sophisticated use of a false identity inevitably leads us to draw parallels with modern psychology. Because, the concept of wearing a mask to navigate society is not exclusive to theology.
No, not at all.
Carl Jung, one of the foundational figures of psychoanalysis, developed the concept of the persona. We really need to contrast Jung's persona with the pathology of Nifaq, so you, the listener, don't confuse normal social adaptation with a spiritual disease.
It is a vital distinction to make. Jung defined the persona, which is derived from the Latin word for an actor's mask, as the social face the individual presents to the world. It is an adaptive, highly necessary tool designed to facilitate smooth interactions in complex social environments.
Right. For example, the vocabulary, the tone of voice, and the body language I utilize when I'm recording this deep dive with you are entirely different from the persona I project when I'm playing basketball with my brothers, which is different again from how I speak to my mother. I am still authentically me, but I'm highlighting specific facets of my personality to adapt to the contextual requirements of the environment.
And Jung argued that this fluidity is indicative of a healthy psyche, provided the individual does not over-identify with the persona to the point where they lose their core authentic self. The persona is designed to build social cohesion.
So how does the psychological mechanism of Nifaq deviate from this healthy adaptation? Because the hypocrite is also wearing a mask to navigate a social environment.
The deviation lies entirely in the underlying intent and the core reality behind the mask. The persona is about harmonious adaptation. Nifaq is about malevolent infiltration.
Malevolent infiltration.
The hypocrite is not highlighting a facet of their true self. They're consciously constructing a completely fabricated identity to conceal a hostile reality. Their objective is not to coexist, but to subvert, exploit, and extract personal gain at the expense of the community's integrity.
Let me propose an analogy to crystallize the difference. It seems to me that it's the difference between wearing a tailored suit to a high-stakes job interview versus wearing a security guard's uniform to rob a bank.
Wow, that is an exceptional parallel.
The individual in the suit is utilizing the persona. They are dressing the part, speaking professionally, and presenting their best self to secure the job. It's an adaptive performance, but they genuinely want to do the work.
Right.
The individual in the security uniform, however, is actively weaponizing a symbol of trust. They wear the uniform specifically so that the bank tellers will drop their guard, allowing them to bypass the security protocols and extract the vault's contents. The uniform is a tool for devastation. That is Nifaq.
The weaponization of the sacred mask. They adopt the aesthetics of piety to bypass the community's immune system.
Having mapped out the terrifying linguistic roots, the theological severity, the social symptoms, the historical devastation of Ibn Ubayy, and the psychological malice of the disease, I have to acknowledge the heavy burden this places on the listener.
That's a lot to process.
Listening to this deep dive can induce profound anxiety. I mean, if the symptoms are as subtle as a minor lie or a skipped prayer in the dark, and the consequence is the lowest depth of the hellfire, how do we survive? We must transition to the prescription. What is the cure for Nifaq?
The systematic process of curing the spiritual heart is known as tazkiyah, the purification of the soul. But before an individual can engage with the actionable remedies, they must establish a specific psychological baseline. And this baseline operates on a fascinating paradox.
The paradox of fear, famously articulated by the great early scholar Hassan al-Basri.
Yes, Hassan al-Basri stated regarding hypocrisy, "Only a believer fears it, and only a hypocrite feels safe from it."
That statement requires a deep psychological unpacking. Only a believer fears it.
If a listener is absorbing this analysis and they feel a tightening their chest, a sense of panic questioning, do I exhibit these symptoms? Have I engaged in fujara? Am I slipping into minor hypocrisy? That very anxiety is the clearest diagnostic proof that their heart is spiritually alive.
Because a dead heart registers no pain.
Exactly. The hypocrite never experiences internal anxiety regarding their sincerity because they place zero value on the divine assessment.
The fear is the pulse of faith. And this wasn't a theoretical comfort, it was the lived reality of the greatest generation of Muslims. The companions of the Prophet experienced this terror profoundly. The narration of Hamdallah is a perfect case study in this spiritual anxiety.
Hamdallah was a deeply devoted companion. The narration describes an incident where Abu Bakr, the closest friend of the Prophet and the future first caliph, encounters Hamdallah running out of his own home, weeping uncontrollably in the streets, shouting, "Hamdallah has become a hypocrite! Hamdallah has become a hypocrite!"
He's having a full-blown spiritual panic attack in public. What triggered it?
Abu Bakr stops him and asks for the cause of his distress. Hamdallah explains the mechanics of his perceived hypocrisy. He says, "When we sit in the presence of the messenger of Allah and he reminds us of the realities of paradise and the hellfire, our hearts soften. It is as if we can see the hereafter with our physical eyes. Our faith is at an absolute peak."
Okay, that makes sense.
But when I leave his gathering, when I return to my home, when I play with my children, laugh with my wives, and attend to my agricultural business, my heart hardens. I forget much of what I felt. The spiritual high fades.
Wow.
Hamdallah interpreted the natural biological fluctuation of human emotion and focus as the devastating disease of Nifaq.
He assumed that because his internal state wasn't locked at a permanent angelic 10 out of 10 intensity.
Yeah.
He was living a double life.
Exactly. Abu Bakr, with immense humility, realizes he experiences the exact same emotional gravity, and they both rush to the Prophet seeking a cure.
And what did the Prophet say?
The Prophet's response is a masterclass in psychological grounding. He essentially normalizes the human struggle. He tells them, "By him in whose hand is my soul, if your state of mind remained continuously as it is in my presence, the angels would descend to shake hands with you on the streets." Wow. He assures them that faith ebbs and flows. There's a time for this and a time for that.
The Prophet validates their humanity. He clarifies that an emotional baseline that shifts between deep devotion and worldly responsibility is not hypocrisy. It is simply the design of the human operating system.
Exactly.
But the crucial takeaway is the fear Hamdallah exhibited, and it was not limited to him. We see this exact terror in Umar ibn al-Khattab.
Umar, the second caliph, a man explicitly promised paradise by the Prophet, a man whose sheer conviction was legendary. Yet after the Prophet passed away, Umar's internal audit was relentless.
He sought out Hudhaifa ibn al-Yaman.
Hudayfa was uniquely entrusted by the Prophet with a secret register containing the specific names of the hypocrites in Medina. He was the keeper of the secret. Umar, the most powerful man in the Muslim world, physically corners Hudayfa and begs him, "I ask you by Allah, did the messenger of Allah include my name among them?"
The man who conquered empires was terrified that he was secretly orchestrating his own spiritual destruction.
It's staggering.
If the titans of Islamic history scrutinized their hearts with that level of microscopic intensity, our complacency in the modern era is terrifying.
The fear is the prerequisite. Once the fear is established, we can administer the spiritual therapeutics. The tradition outlines 3 actionable, highly effective remedies to cure the heart of the hypocritical reflex.
Let's walk through the prescription. What is the first protocol?
The first is a highly specific neurological and spiritual rewiring process, prescribed directly by the Prophet. We can frame it as the 40-day congregational challenge.
Okay.
The Prophet stated, "Whoever prays for Allah 40 days in congregation, catching the first takbirah, the opening takbirat al-ihram, 2 absolutions are recorded for him. Absolution from the hellfire and absolution from hypocrisy."
The parameters are incredibly strict, 40 consecutive days. Every single obligatory prayer for Jur, Duha, Azur, Maghrib, Isha must be prayed in congregation. And you can't merely saunter in during the second or third unit of the prayer. You must be physically present and aligned in the row the exact moment the imam initiates the prayer with the first takbir.
Why does this specific regimen act as a cure? Because Nifaq, as we established, thrives on convenience, laziness, and the avoidance of friction. It thrives on skipping Fajr in the cold and Isha in the dark.
Right.
By forcing your physical body and your psyche to consistently show up for the divine mandate, completely overriding your mood, your exhaustion, and your schedule for 40 continuous days, you execute a hostile takeover of your own habits.
You shatter the neural pathways of laziness.
Exactly, and forge a new and neurological baseline of discipline and sincerity.
It is an intense spiritual boot camp. If you can push through the immense friction of those 40 days, the mask simply cannot survive the consistency. Authentic devotion takes root in the newly cleared space. That addresses the physical habit. What is the second remedy?
The second remedy directly targets the core motivation of the hypocrite, Riya, the cancer of showing off. To starve the ego's desire for an audience, you must aggressively cultivate a secret life of devotion. You must perform high-value spiritual actions where absolutely no human being can observe them.
We are talking about spiritual chemotherapy.
That is the perfect analogy. Chemotherapy introduces a powerful agent to eradicate cancerous cells. Secret devotion eradicates the cells of social validation.
So how does that look practically?
It involves waking up in the deep third of the night to pray when your entire household is unconscious. It involves weeping over your past transgressions while isolated in your car during a commute. It involves executing financial charity with such profound secrecy that, as the prophetic metaphor states, your left hand does not know what your right hand has spent.
If the action is completely invisible to society, the ego cannot extract any praise from it. If nobody knows you donated the funds, nobody can call you generous.
Exactly. Building a robust portfolio of secret deeds actions that exist exclusively between you and the divine serves as an impenetrable psychological shield against the whispers of Nifaq.
I love that.
When the internal anxiety spikes and you ask yourself, am I a hypocrite? You can look at that secret ledger. A hypocrite, operating purely on a transactional basis for social credit, would never sacrifice their sleep at 3 a.m. to pray in the dark. because the societal return on investment is zero. The secret deed is the ultimate proof of genuine theology.
Build a secret life with God. That is profoundly beautiful. And the third remedy.
The third protocol is a dual mechanism of constant supplication, duar, and a rigorous recalibration of your timeline through the lens of the hereafter. You must verbally, consistently beg the divine to purify your internal state.
We have to ask for the cure.
Yes. The prophet continuously modeled this vulnerability, praying, "O Allah, purify my heart from hypocrisy and my actions from showing off." You cannot cure the disease without asking the ultimate healer for the medicine.
And what about recalibrating the timeline?
You must anchor your daily decision-making process to the reality of the Day of Judgment. The Quran refers to this event as Yawm Tubla Asara, the day when all secrets will be violently exposed and tested.
The ultimate destruction of the persona.
Yes. When you are in a boardroom or a living room, and the temptation arises to deploy a lie, to betray a trust, or to perform a religious act for the applause of the crowd, you must forcefully project your mind to that day.
Visualize it.
Visualize the sheer, crushing psychological humiliation of your carefully curated facade being ripped away and your deepest, most toxic secrets being broadcast to the entirety of human history. Let the terror of that cosmic exposure burn away the cheap temptation to be fake in the present moment.
If I synthesize the trajectory of this deep dive, it fundamentally reframes our understanding of the internal struggle. Doing good deeds in public, leading the community, or maintaining a professional demeanor isn't inherently dangerous, provided the architectural foundation of the secret life is secure.
Right.
And experiencing a harsh disconnect between your public output and your private spiritual exhaustion, the Hamdallah experience, is not hypocrisy.
It is the defining feature of the believer's journey.
Maintaining consistency in your public devotion and your moral obligations, even on the days when your internal faith feels dangerously low and your ego is screaming for relief, is not nifaq. It is jihad al-nafs. It is the noble, brutal, exhausting inner warfare required to drag your flawed, reluctant psychology into alignment with the divine standard.
Hypocrisy is when you are entirely comfortable with the false facade. Jihad al-nafs is when the facade frustrates you, and you're dedicating your life to making the internal reality match the external presentation.
What an incredible journey we have taken today. We began by peering into the two-holed burrow of a tiny desert jerboa, and we followed that concept down into the absolute deepest, darkest, most complex corridors of human psychology.
We really went everywhere.
We did. We've seen how a lack of internal sincerity is not a victimless crime. It destroys the currency of trust. It fragments the unity of the community. It incites historical devastation, and ultimately, it condemns the soul to the lowest depths of the fire.
The diagnosis is heavy, and the medicine requires immense discipline, but the cure guarantees the survival of the soul.
It does. And as we conclude, I want to direct a final provocative thought directly to you, the listener, to mull over as you navigate the rest of your day. We discussed the sheer, trembling terror that giants of faith like Umar ibn al-Khattab felt regarding the purity of their own sincerity.
Yes, that terror.
I want you to consider the phrase, "I know I am not a hypocrite." Based on the complex pathology we have just decoded, could it be that the exact moment you feel absolutely certain you are safe from hypocrisy, you have just exhibited the primary defining symptom of the disease?
It is the ultimate paradox to wrestle.
How do you live dynamically in that beautiful razor-edge tension? How do you constantly, ruthlessly audit your own heart, checking the load-bearing walls for the hairline fractures of Nifaq, without plunging into the paralyzing, destructive despair of constantly doubting your own faith? Navigating that tension is the work of a lifetime. We ask Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, to purify our hearts, to protect us from the visible and invisible diseases of the soul, and to grant us a sincerity that survives the day of exposure. Keep digging deep into the architecture of your own spiritual journey.